Game of Thrones Season 8 begins in symmetry with the very first episode of the show itself. But instead of the incestuous Lannisters arriving at Winterfell, it's the hot new incestuous couple, Jon and Dany, arriving at Winterfell alongside an army of Unsullied, a bunch of familiar faces, 2 increasingly hungry dragons, and a cock joke.
Should consider yourself lucky. At least your balls won't freeze off.
Cue a bittersweet reunion between the remaining Stark children and a slightly more tense introduction between Sansa and Dany.
Winterfell is yours, Your Grace.
The Lady of Winterfell remains sceptical of the Dragon Mother's right to the Iron Throne, and it seems that she's also a bit pissed that she's got to find food for her pets.
What do dragons eat, anyway?
Whatever they want.
As the Stark homestead becomes the last stand for every bannerman in the north, most still consider Jon their king, despite the fact that he bent the knee to Daenerys in Season 7. Which brings us to Samwell Tarly, who's told by Dany that she killed his father when he refused to surrender.
At least I'll be allowed home again, now that my brother's the Lord.
Yeah, about that.
Your brother stood with your father.
Meanwhile, at King's Landing, Cersei finally accepts Euron Greyjoy to her bedchambers after he brings her a new army in the form of the Golden Company. Unaware that Cersei is already pregnant with Jaime's unborn child, the self-proclaimed King of the Iron Islands wants to give her a gift.
I'm going to put a prince in your belly.
Around the same time, Qyburn also asks Bronn to assassinate both Jaime and Tyrion for the Queen.
She has a keen sense of poetic justice.
Further north at Last Hearth, Tormund, Beric and Edison discover a gruesome graveyard of corpses left as a sign by the Night King, who's marching ever closer. Back at Winterfell, Jon finally learns about his true parentage, and Sam begs him to accept his birthright as ruler of the Seven Kingdoms.
Your mother was Lyanna Stark. And your father, your real father, was Rhaegar Targaryen.
Jon, as you can imagine, for someone who's just learned he's sleeping with his auntie, is lost for words. Speaking of which, Jaime arrives at Winterfell, only to be met with an icy stare from plot device Bran, who seems to finally remember the cause of his fall that kicked off this sorry chain of events all the way back in Season 1. Episode 2 is all about the calm before the storm, as the Night King continues his march towards Winterfell. Following Jaime's arrival at Stark HQ, Daenerys considers what to do with the man who killed her father.
He told me other stories as well. About all the things we would do to that man. Once we took back the Seven Kingdoms and had him in our grasp.
She's not a fan, but Sansa and Brienne manage to persuade her to keep the Kingslayer around. At least while the Night King is still at large. Jon, meanwhile, is avoiding Dany like the plague, cursed with the knowledge that the pair are related following last episode's bombshell from Sam. So the Mother of Dragons instead uses her time to mend relationships with both Tyrion and Sansa, which goes well until Sansa brings up the question of the North.
It was taken from us. And we took it back, and we said we'd never bow to anyone else again. What about the North?
Later that evening, Winterfell's War Council decides on a plan of action for the battle ahead, sending the women and children into the safety of the Stark crypts below, while using Bran as bait to draw the Night King out from his army and into the Godswood. Because, as Sam points out,
If I wanted to erase the world of men, I'd start with you.
by this point, Tormund, Beric and Edison have all made it back to Winterfell, as has Theon, who promises to protect Bran with his band of Ironborn, much to the joys of Sansa, who may be sparking up a romantic relationship with this old childhood friend. Speaking of, after a bit more of Arya's unique brand of flirting,
You make my weapon yet?
and a 2-second cameo from Ghost, Gendry does as he's told, and then they embark on a surprise fling, while Tyrion, Brienne, Tormund, Davos, Jaime and Podrick hang out by the warmth of the fire. Tormund reveals how he got his name.
I killed the giant when I was 10.
Jaime makes Brienne a knight,
Arise, Brienne of Tarth.
and Podrick sings a song.
The ones she had lost, and the ones she had found, and the ones who had loved her the most.
It's not so fun for Jon and Dany though, who are about to have their first lovers' tiff after Jon finally reveals that he is Aegon Targaryen, rightful heir to the Iron Throne. Dany, as you might imagine, isn't happy about the news.
No one in the world knew. Except your brother and your best friend. Doesn't seem strange to you?
And on that note, the Night King arrives alongside an army of White Walkers, so that'll have to wait. The Battle of Winterfell is here. The war between the Night King's army and those tasked with defending the Stark HQ begins, like all good wars, on the open battlefield outside the castle gates. Conveniently, Melisandre returns at the last minute from her endeavours in Volantis and lights up the Dothraki swords before they charge towards the undead. But it doesn't help. This leads to the undead masses charging into Winterfell's first line of defence, which includes Grey Worm and the Unsullied, Brienne, Jaime, Tormund, Sam, Edison, the Hound, Beric, and a few armies worth of foot soldiers. Having seen her Dothraki army get obliterated, Dany diverts from the plan of waiting for the Night King, and her and Jon mount up and take to the skies on Drogon and Rhaegal. But with even the hellfire from the dragons not enough, Winterfell's armies retreat back into the castle, and Edison gets killed in the process. However, another helpful dose of magic from Melisandre lights up the trench and buys them some brief time to recover. Inside Winterfell's walls, Brienne, Jaime, Arya and others try to keep the invaders at bay, with Lyanna Mormont trading fatal blows with an undead giant. With Jon and Dany taking on the Night King from above, the White Walkers' leader eventually falls from his dragon, but Dany's efforts to burn him to a crisp prove to be useless.
Dracarys.
A little singed, he heads for Godswood, raising the dead, including the Stark corpses below the crypts, to keep Jon from pursuing. Meanwhile, Arya finds herself in the stealth section, trapped in the Winterfell library, but after some quick feet and a dagger to the throat of one of the undead, she's rescued by the Hound and Beric, resulting in a noble sacrifice from the latter, as Melisandre reveals,
The Lord brought him back for a purpose. Now that purpose has been served.
Dany then falls off her dragon, but is rescued by Jorah at the last minute, which, yep, you guessed it, doesn't end well for him. The Night King arrives in the Godswood and Theon takes his final stand. Leaving the three-eyed raven defenceless. But surprise, just before he can plunge his sword into the youngest surviving Stark, Arya leaps onto the Night King's back and thrusts a dragon glass dagger into his belly, turning him and all his followers into ash. With the Battle of Winterfell now over, Melisandre walks out into the snow, removing her necklace to reveal her true self and succumbing to a quiet demise. The Lord of Light, it seems, is finally done with the Red Woman. Episode 4 begins in mourning for those who lost their lives at the Battle of Winterfell, as the victors burn the bodies of the dead outside the castle walls. But grief eventually turns to joy as later that evening, a feast is held to celebrate the defeat of the White Walkers. Daenerys gives Gendry a new title,
To Lord Gendry Baratheon of Storm's End.
Tormund tries and fails to woo the big woman,
Please pardon me for a moment.
while Sansa and Clegane have a quiet heart-to-heart, looking back on how far they've both come since their King's Landing days. Then someone orders a Starbucks and leaves it in shop. Spurred on by his new status as Lord, Gendry proposes to Arya, but she's having none of it.
My wife.
That's not me.
Jon and Dany have an uncomfortable conversation in private in which the Dragon Mother begs Jon to keep his real identity a secret, but really it's only so she can successfully maintain her claim to the throne. Jon is just too good-natured to make that kind of promise, and eventually spills the beans to Arya and Sansa after they swear not to tell anyone else.
I swear it. Swear.
Jaime and Brienne finally make their bed together, and all hope of a Brienne-Tormund romance is lost for good. The next morning, Jon and the Northmen set out on horseback, while Daenerys, the Unsullied, and her advisors travel to Dragonstone by sea. Tormund and the Free Folk, however, head back beyond the wall, taking Ghost with them. He wouldn't have liked it down south anyway. Arya and the Hound sneak off to King's Landing for some unfinished business, but not before Sansa breaks the promise she made, 24 hours ago, and shares her secret about Jon to Tyrion.
What if there's someone else? Someone better?
Tyrion then reveals the news to Varys, and soon pretty much the entire kingdom will know.
If a handful of people know now, hundreds will know soon. Then what happens?
Suddenly, Euron Greyjoy and the Iron Fleet turn up out of nowhere, killing Rhaegar with a barrage of arrows, destroying most of Dany's ships, and kidnapping Missandei, which really pisses Dany off. Back at Winterfell, upon hearing the news of Cersei's attack, Jaime rides out to King's Landing, rejecting Brienne's pleas to stay with her, seemingly with the intention to go and save his sister/lover before it's too late. Outside the walls of Cersei's increasingly shrinking kingdom, Dany and Tyrion attempt to hold peace talks with the Queen Mother. Her response doesn't go down well. At all.
If you have any last words, now is the time.
Episode 5, The Bells, is an episode of 2 parts, the first section being a political thriller in Dragonstone. The seeds of betrayal are sown, and Varys begins sending letters about the truth of Jon's lineage to God knows who. Jon himself has arrived in Dragonstone too, but remains fiercely loyal to his queen, despite Varys' attempts to entice him with his true calling as the one true king.
I don't want it. I never have.
Unfortunately, once Tyrion spills the beans to the Dragon Mother about Varys' plans, she burns the eunuch alive.
Dracarys.
Meanwhile, it transpires that Jaime has been captured by the Unsullied on his way to King's Landing. But after organising an escape route from beneath the Red Keep for his siblings, Tyrion secretly frees his brother, begging him to get Cersei to surrender and ring King's Landing's bells before Dany destroys the city completely.
Swear to me. You have my word.
The following morning, the siege of King's Landing begins, and the episode turns into a full-blown war story. The battle kicks off with Drogon and Daenerys' attack on the Iron Fleet, which goes a lot better than the last time they met, and Dany quickly reduces Euron's navy to soggy timber, and then destroys every last Scorpion crossbow that Cersei has up her sleeve. After Drogon takes out the city walls, Jon, Grey Worm and the rest of Daenerys' army make quick work of the Golden Company, who surrender after a blistering defeat at the front line. But despite the ringing of the bells, Daenerys has had enough of being the merciful queen and begins a full-scale demolition of the city. On the ground, both Jon and Tyrion are dismayed as the Unsullied begin to attack the surrendered army and innocent civilians, while Dany unleashes hellfire from above, and Jon eventually orders his men to retreat. Cersei, meanwhile, has been watching her kingdom fall from the safety of the Red Keep, and Qyburn eventually persuades her to make an orderly escape.
Make us hold fast would be a better place to wait out the storm.
Also in the Red Keep, however, are Arya and the Hound, who have arrived to take down Cersei and the Mountain respectively. But Clegane convinces Arya to forget her kill list and escape the city while she still can. For once, she takes the Hound's advice to heart and leaves.
Sandor. Thank you.
Jaime has also managed to somehow find his way into the keep via a secret route on the coast, but finds a washed-up Euron looking for a fight. The two trade fatal blows with one another, but Jaime continues on in search of Cersei, despite receiving a mortal wound from the now dead Greyjoy King. Inside the keep, the Queen, Qyburn and the Mountain are making their exit, but bump into Sandor, and this is it. The long-awaited Clegane Bowl begins.
Fucking die!
It ends with Sandor sacrificing himself to kill his own brother, sending them both flying out of the keep and into the flames below. A distraught Cersei finally runs into Jaime, who rushes her down to the planned escape route, only to discover that the way's been blocked by rubble. The pair share one last hug before the Lannisters' empire literally crumbles down upon them. Back to Arya, and after being knocked unconscious, the Night King's killer awakes to a city strewn with ash, rubble and corpses. She inexplicably finds the only horse left in the city and rides out amongst the mass graveyard on horseback. One does wonder though whether the assassin has just added another name to her list, and if the prophecy about the green eyes may still be fulfilled after all. The Game of Thrones Season 8 finale begins in sombre, ominous fashion as Tyrion looks upon the wreckage of Daenerys' assault on King's Landing, making his way up to the Red Keep and into the crypts below to see if Jaime and Cersei managed to escape. It's bad news. Daenerys then gives a foreboding victory speech to her unsullied and Dothraki army. Tyrion thus resigns as her hand and is taken prisoner for committing treason against the Queen. Jon, having seen what the new Khaleesi of Westeros is capable of, is conflicted about his loyalty and visits Tyrion in his cell for some advice.
Why do you think Sansa told me the truth about you? Because she doesn't want Dany to be queen.
She doesn't get to choose.
No. But you do.
Jon goes to talk to Dany, who is eyeing up the Iron Throne, and stabs the bitch. Drogon, as you might imagine, isn't too pleased about the news, but refrains from killing Jon, perhaps because of their Targaryen connection, perhaps because he's just a dragon, and instead unleashes his grief upon the Iron Throne itself, burning it down into a bubbling pile of molten metal. Because Drogon, who's a dragon, clearly knew that that's what everyone had been fighting over and understood the symbolism of destroying it once and for all. Drogon did that. Drogon. The dragon. The dragon then picks up Daenerys' body and flies off somewhere not to be seen again. Flash forward several months, and we find Tyrion being held for trial by the Council of Bannermen from all the great houses of Westeros, including Sansa, Arya, Bran, Brienne, Sir Davos, Sam, Gendry, Yara, Edmure Tully, not one but 2 bottles of water, must have been really hot out there, and Robin Iron. Yeah, look, he's all grown up now. We learn that the Unsullied and Dothraki have held on to King's Landing since Dany's death, keeping Jon and Tyrion prisoner while negotiations take place over the fate of the Seven Kingdoms. The meeting quickly turns to the question of who should rule, and while one proposal after the other is shot down, including Sam's idea of democracy,
maybe the decision about what's best for everyone should be left to, well, everyone.
Tyrion finally suggests that Bran Stark should be the one to take the power. Everyone present agrees, amazingly. With the exception of Sansa, who declares the North as its own separate kingdom under her leadership. And Bran makes Tyrion his hand, as punishment to make up for his previous mistakes under Daenerys.
I don't want it.
As for Jon, he's given a life sentence as a member of the Night's Watch, and after a heartwarming farewell with his siblings, rides north to the Wall. Oh, hi Ghost, glad you can make it. Arya, meanwhile, decides to set sail west of Westeros, beginning a new adventure to discover what lies beyond the borders of the mapped world, and I hear those spin-off bells are ringing, while the Unsullied gives up King's Landing and heads back across the Narrow Sea to Narth, presumably alongside the Dothraki. Bran's new small council includes Bronn as Master of Coin, Sam as Archmaester, who has, in true meta fashion, just helped publish a book about the recent wars of Westeros called A Song of Ice and Fire.
I helped him with the title.
Brienne as Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, and Davos as Master of Ships. Bran himself is trying to track down Drogon, who still remains missing, but a productive small council meeting suggests that things are finally starting to get better for the people of King's Landing and beyond. Game of Thrones' final shot, however, is of Jon, who's seen venturing north of the Wall with Tormund, Ghost, and the rest of the Free Folk. A brief appearance of foliage sprouting through the snow as his new people take back their homeland suggests that winter is finally over, and, though his actions have come at a cost, Jon may at last find some peace and happiness after all.